In the little village of Lovecraft, there's a manor called the Locke House, which has a history going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. But under this manor, something truly terrifying lurks. And the family that has just moved into the manor is about to discover what that is. Today I'm going to talk to you about the series Locke Key by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. This is a series of graphic novels, 6 in the trade paperback versions. These graphic novels tell the story of the Locke family, which is a family that lives in San Francisco when they have a truly traumatic and horrible experience. The father of the family is murdered, and as a result of this, they decide to move back home to their ancestral mansion on the East Coast in the little village of Lovecraft called the Locke House. When they get to the Locke House, the 3 kids in this family, Tyler, Kinsey, and Bode, start to discover keys which have supernatural powers. They unlock doors or other objects, and impossible things start to happen. And through the use of these keys, they start to uncover a history connected with this house and connected with their family that explains why they are where they are, how they got to where they are, and a whole bunch of terrible things that have happened, and the repercussions of those things they have to deal with. These are some truly gorgeous graphic novels. Gabriel Rodriguez is an amazing artist, and page after page is just vibrant and beautiful and expressive. The thing that I find especially powerful in his art is he's really good at conveying human emotion. The expressions on their faces, their body language, the tone and composition and color of the pieces all help really immerse you in the experiences and feelings of the characters in this book. And speaking of character, Joe Hill's writing is amazing. Every single character in these books receives an attention to detail that would have been remarkable if this had been done in a novel where we actually get to be inside the characters' heads. But even the most minor characters in these books is fleshed out with a uniqueness of personality that is vibrant and realistic, has a character arc which involves development and progression and resolution, which is astounding. Be forewarned, these books definitely earn the horror designation. Some really brutal violence and traumatic things happen to characters that you really love in these books. Be prepared to flip the page and be subjected to seeing something awful. Despite the fact that these books contain horrific things, like a lot of horror, they're actually ultimately about what it means to be human in the face of horror and suffering, how we overcome trauma and darkness, how we get through these experiences and retain some semblance of our humanity, or even heal following these experiences. So for example, there's a theme through these books of characters that try to flee from this horror and trauma in various ways. The mother attempts to escape it by fleeing into alcoholism. The middle daughter, Kinsey, attempts to escape it by cutting herself off from emotions of fear and anxiety, things that whole parts of herself she tries to remove to keep herself from feeling things she doesn't want to feel. And the youngest child, Bode, flees into sort of a fantasy world, of his imagination to escape the real trauma that he's experienced. Only the oldest child, Tyler, sort of dwells in it. For a long time in the books, he appears to be the unhealthy one, because he appears to sort of be dwelling in and lingering on the suffering. But what slowly is revealed is that his process of actually facing it is what everyone ultimately has to come to, and everyone finds their own ways of facing the trauma and coping with and dealing with the trauma. Without spoiling anything, the ultimate conflict that almost every character in the book faces is how to express their full humanity, how to live into their full humanity, even to choose to be human at incredible cost to themselves and others. Instead of, say, living as a slave or as something as subhuman, as something monstrous, or as something, trapped in addiction or another means of escaping from the choice to be human in the face of horror and suffering. One thing I noticed about Locke and Key that I think is interesting, which goes against a trend that's common in modern storytelling, is that they dedicate a significant portion of time at the end, maybe a whole issue of the book, maybe 30 pages, and another half of another issue probably, so maybe 45 pages total, to denouement. So in the classic form of a story, you have, the initiating conflict, the rising action, the climax, and then a little bit of falling action, and then the denouement. The denouement is where we see the characters dealing with the aftermath of the conflict that led to the climax and coming to some sort of resolution and resolving their character arcs, who they become through the process of going through this conflict. But in a lot of modern stories, the climax is pushed right almost to the very end, and there's very little space or time given for the denouement. In other words, the book might end immediately after the big bad has been killed or the conflict has been resolved. It more or less just lets the reader kind of imagine that everyone kind of copes with it in whatever way, the aftermath is handled. We don't really see whatever has to be done to cope with it. We just sort of assume that it gets taken care of, or that everything just returns to the status quo. In a lot of Marvel movies, for example, you know, the climatic battle at the end, the last action sequence, goes practically right up to the credits. There might be just a little bit of time before the credits for a tiny bit of resolution, but in some cases, you know, the only denouement we really get would be like a cookie after the credits, where we see the Avengers eating shawarma and going, you know, there's no scene of them rebuilding Manhattan and coping with, you know, the devastation and destruction that was wrought through this conflict. And as such, character arcs in a lot of modern stories are kind of shallow. Like, they go through the point of crisis and conflict to the point where there is a change, and then they kind of stop, and we just sort of assume that, oh, okay, after they reached this crisis, then everything was okay in some way. This story gives a lot of time and resolves every single character's arc in a very satisfactory way. It really takes you through the journey of them coming to terms with what they experienced and making sense out of it. And that is, I think, a heroic choice on the part of the authors to, like, let you see that in the characters. After you've already basically told your story, and you let the reader continue with the characters, experiencing what the characters are experiencing afterward. That's sort of like, whew, wow, that was heavy or hard. The choices we made were there. I think that processing is really valuable, really useful for a reader, and I love that Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez let us do that in Locke Key, let us say goodbye to characters that we've been, you know, sort of vicariously through a really traumatic experience with. Basically, everyone I know who's a reader, who likes to read, has at some point in time finished a book or a series of books where at the end of it they were sad because they were, not because the book was sad, but because they were having to say goodbye to characters that they'd spent time with, in which they'd invested emotional energy into. And when the author doesn't allow that time at the end of the book for a denouement, for a resolution, for the reader to say goodbye to the characters, it feels like you've kind of been robbed. So, Locke and Key, amazing series, well worth your time, and it won't rob you of the opportunity to cry a lot at the end. Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files is a cynical, hard-bitten detective straight out of a noir mystery, except he's also a wizard. It's a great series of books that just keeps getting better by Jim Butcher, and you should definitely go read it. One of the evil groups that Dresden has to contend with is a group called the Order of the Blackened Denarius. This is a group of mortals possessed by fallen angels with all sorts of creepy supernatural powers. These angels themselves come in 30 pieces of silver, famous ancient Roman coins attached to a particular act of betrayal. Yes, those 30 pieces of silver, the ones Judas received for betraying Jesus to the Sanhedrin.